My name is Rebecca Holcombe, and after serving as Vermont Secretary of Education, I'm now running to be governor of this great little state. I feel very strongly we need to mask up to open up. We've seen nationally how quickly this virus can spread when people don't wear face masks, particularly in settings where people come together, whether it's schools, whether it's childcare, whether it's meat packing facilities. Second, we need to make sure the Vermont Department of Health has sufficient capacity to respond quickly and efficiently with testing, tracking, and tracing in the event that there are multiple resurgences, including in multiple parts of the state at the same time. This is particularly important because we're proposing to open up schools and childcares in every county. And we know the Department of Health has about 340 fewer people than they did maybe in 2008. So it's particularly important to make sure they have enough people on deck to provide the care and the support Vermonters need and the responsive guidance that we need in each of our communities where there's schools opening up in the event that we have multiple surges at the same time. And people need to understand, for example, that when we're talking about opening up schools, schools can do everything they can, but what we're really talking about is what communities do to keep people safe and schools safe. And that means we have to start, each of us individually, doing everything we can to prevent the spread. Well, there are really two parts to this, and we're in the middle of an immediate crisis right now where an unprecedented number of Vermonters have lost their jobs and their source of income and their access to healthcare as they knew it. We know that we are heavily reliant on the tourism and recreation sector, which was the first to go and maybe one of the slowest to come back, particularly if people continue to be fearful about the risk of spreading COVID-19. So in the short run, we have to make sure that as we think about coping with our budget crisis next year, we are making sure that we prioritize people's health and well-being first. We need to make sure that people have access to the food they need. We need to make sure people have access to homes where they can be safe and prevent the spread. And we need to make sure that they have access to the healthcare they need and not worry about that. So some of those most fundamental human rights are the things that we need to put first as we respond. They can also use the purchasing power of government to strengthen local food systems, to invest in our local farms and local food providers in ways that return dollars to the Vermont economy. We found out as Secretary of Education that every dollar that we spent from our schools on a local farm added about 60 cents into the Vermont economy of additional value. And we need to keep coming back to how do we use what we have to invest in Vermont in ways that provide more stable and predictable revenues to Vermonters and to families so that we can weather this crisis together. I would encourage every single Vermonter who's lost income to apply for 3 Squares Vermont. This program, it's like health insurance, but for food. It's a federal program that is there for people when they've lost income and they're struggling or worried about their ability to feed their families. And it basically gives them cash so that they can meet their nutritional needs. It's so important for several reasons. First and foremost, many families may not realize they're eligible for it. And if they apply, they may find that they have more discretionary income to keep their families healthy. The second is it brings federal dollars into Vermont. And every federal dollar we bring into Vermont, a dollar that's in our Vermont economy, supporting Vermont businesses from our farms, through our food providers, through our restaurants. And so we need to make sure that we're doing that. The third reason that many Vermonters may not be aware of, but the ability of schools to access food, to provide universal meals for all children in their system, for summer programs that feed children throughout the summer when school's not in session, are tied to the number of families in those communities that are accessing 3 Squares for Vermont. So when families choose to sign up, they're actually helping their local school take care of all the children in the community. So it's just really, really important, and I can't overstate that enough. I think it is a major issue, and I think we're already beginning to see some of the vulnerability that we get with climate change. And it is associated with profound inequities in the state in terms of the impact, but it's also, it's a huge cost already to the state. It will ultimately affect the bond rating that everyone's so worried about. But I think we've made a mistake in terms of framing the response to climate purely as a cost. What we need to understand is that it's also one of our biggest single opportunities. We are a state that is unique in the extent to which we rely on out-of-state energy to power our state. When we send, 3 billion a year out of state to buy energy from other countries and other states, including about probably $1.5 million in fossil fuel energy. We're sending money permanently out of the Vermont economy to people who pay income taxes in other states. We are losing a significant opportunity here to build Vermont's economic vibrancy by expanding local green and renewable energy, including in some of our rural communities. Not only does this bring good wage jobs to Vermont in ways that create wealth right here, including in some counties that have had a pretty tough time, but it also builds our resilience and our independence in the face of storms, but also in the face of some of the economic and political uncertainty we see right now. I do. And, we see it in too many sectors. And we know all of our Vermonters come into this world full of hope and promise. But when you look at the tail end of every single institution, what we see is disparity in outcomes that speak to some barrier to opportunity. We see it in our school outcomes. We see it in our healthcare outcomes. We see it now in empirical studies that look at how people of color, Black and brown Vermonters, are treated when they call for health services and how they're referred. We see it in disproportionality in our police and criminal justice data. So I think we are at a point where there's enough data, we can't pretend we don't have an issue. The ways we tried to deal with this at the Agency of Education were severalfold. The first thing we did is try to collect data. And if you look at the end of our tenure, every single report that we submitted to the legislature broke out outcomes and broke down participation in critical state programs by significant different demographic groups, so that we could look at whether policies that seemed race neutral or socioeconomically neutral in their face were actually having what appeared to be fair and just outcomes. So the second thing we did is we worked with the Human Rights Commission to make available anti-bias training to every single person in the Agency of Education. So the other thing we did is we worked very hard to get public input, particularly from communities that have been marginalized historically, to make sure that as we propose policies, they were part of designing the policies. Because if we don't have different voices at the table, we're going to keep getting the same results. And I think we all know that we're not going to be healthy and well as a state if we don't do better. The first thing I would say is that we do need a statewide standard for force, and I'm glad that's coming through. And we need to be really clear that public safety, the purpose of it is public safety. And if people don't feel safe, it isn't public safety. And so, in particular in communities where we have up to 20% of our residents saying that they don't feel safe, we need to be asking hard questions. So in addition to standards for appropriate care, I think we need to have strong community oversight and community review boards that can make robust recommendations, but also have some accountability of public safety to the public that the public safety serves. And that means making sure that there's some responsiveness or accountability in that. And I think we also have work to do around anti-bias training and making sure that we have appropriate training for de-escalation and restorative practices, so that we see our role as government entities as being helpful and supportive, and not first as being punitive and aggressive. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity there, which isn't to say that there aren't people who commit heinous crimes who need to be incarcerated, but we also need to be attentive to whether we're serving public safety. And the last is we need to collect better and more comprehensive data. It's not just about traffic stops. It's about all contacts. I've spoken to multiple young people who talk about walking in the street and being stopped on a frequent basis. It changes qualitatively their experience in our communities and how welcome and supportive they feel in our communities. If we can track the data, we'll be able to ask the questions to make sure that we're really making every Vermonter feel that they're treated fairly. We're going to have to be aggressively looking for opportunities to use the money available at the federal level to piece together solutions here. But we also have two really important opportunities here in Vermont. The first are the communications union districts that were put into law by the legislature, expanding on the model put together by EC Fiber, which lets communities set up as municipalities so they can access municipal bond markets. This is so important because the cost of borrowing is so much lower. It makes it much cheaper for these entities to access revenue revenue that they need to expand and ultimately become self-sustaining. And the other opportunity that we need to turn into is we already know that many homes that don't have internet access do actually have fiber at their front door. And that's because many of our electric public utilities are running fiber already around the power lines. But because we regulate utilities differently than telecoms, we can't just ask our utilities to push out internet access through their electric wires. But there are powerful opportunities here to look at and develop and support public-private partnerships that use the existing infrastructure and reduce the cost of pushing internet to the front door. And those are the kinds of things I'll lean into, because if there's one thing we all know, that really, broadband is the electricity of the 21st century, and there's really very little hope of bringing opportunity and new economic activity, particularly to our rural communities, in any kind of equitable way if we don't just get this done. I've spent about a month in the fall reading with young people around the state to figure out what it was that they felt we needed to do to make sure our state was a place that young families could live and be well and enjoy raising their families. And there was actually remarkable consistency in what they said. They talked about the need for good jobs with good growth opportunities. They wanted to know that if they got a job, there would be a place to move up, to get more experience, or to get better wages over time. And there's a real concern that that's not the case right now in Vermont. There is a desperate need for childcare. There's a perception that the cost of childcare is increasing, but the access to it is getting more and more difficult. And that if families are going to have to go to work, as they do, many of them, two parents, in order to keep a home over their head, they need to know that they're safe places with well-compensated educators who can take care of their kids, give them the loving and responsive care they need to grow up healthy and strong while parents are going to work. I also heard a lot about healthcare, and I heard from family after family who said that, when your premium is $900 a month and your deductible is $7,000, you actually don't have healthcare. What you have is sick care. And so there's a real sense that Vermont has not kept pace some of the basic supports for families, from paid family leave to making sure we have good schools in every community, to making sure that we have access to childcare, jobs that pay well, healthcare that make our communities places families want to live and be. And those are the priorities that I'll be focused on.